Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing okay. So, when we do this, I ask you to tell us your name and share anything with us you feel comfortable sharing so we can get to know you. So, please tell us your
Okay,
name.
great. So my name is Melanie Walker. I am a first year law associate at a law firm in Atlanta, Georgia. So I've been here for less than a year, so I will hit my year mark in September.
Oh, okay. How did law become the path that you chose? What happened in your high school years, or were you always knew you wanted to be a lawyer?
I did not. I think I feel like one of the rare people because I have most of my friends who did this kind of always knew they wanted to do that since undergrad. I was actually a finance major in when I went to undergrad, so I went to University of Georgia and I did finance. And I think I realized in my senior year that I didn't really like finance, but it was kind of like a little too late at that point. I just need to get out, get the degree. So I ended up graduating. Before I graduated, I took a couple law classes just as electives,
Mhm.
ended up really liking them and kind of put it on the back burner because at that point I had already accepted an offer at a financial institution. So I went there, started working, and I think after my first year, I just realized I did not like it. I didn't want to keep doing this. And so then I started studying for the LSAT, started applying to law schools, and by year two, I left that place and then went to law school at Duke.
Okay. And can you, so we, in a lot of these chats, especially with Black lawyers, we've been talking about BALSA. Can you tell us what BALSA is and explain a little bit what that group does for, and there are other affinity groups that have similar names, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so BALSA is specifically the Black Law Students Association. So I was actually very active in that when I was a student at Duke, and I was also very involved in the Black Graduate and Professional Student Association. So both of those I think were very critical for me at my time in Duke. I think especially when you're getting to these types of law schools, they're very white spaces. It's very hard to sometimes be yourself and find support and encouragement and sometimes a community in the ways that you don't realize that you need till you get in the thick of things because law school's hard. And it's no secret that it's hard, but I think it's very easy to get through it when you have a certain group of people supporting you, just friends. I think that's where most of my friends from law school came from, were from both of those organizations. I still keep in touch with almost every single person that I came into touch through those things, even if it's just, small check-ins here and there or like hour-long conversations. I think that they were very critical for me, and I know for a lot of other Black students they were also very important for them as well.
Yeah. So the class, you graduated the class of 2019.
Correct, yes.
I think from what I remember all my time at Duke Law, that class is probably the most vocal, most active in the going ons in the world and at Duke. And I think that was a really powerful time. So why does BALSA matter to law students? Why do students need a BALSA or an affinity group team? Why?
So I could just say for me, and I can give some experience. So I graduated 2019. I think the first year we came in, that November was when Trump was elected into his presidency. Shortly after that, you're hearing about marches at Charlottesville, where there's UVA, other law school that I was considering going to. There was a lot of unrest in Durham, downtown. I lived downtown at the time, so I think it was like 2-3 minutes away from where I lived. There's like all of this social unrest, just a lot going on. And at the same time, you're supposed to not think about that and do really well in school, right? Because our first year is the hardest year of law school. So you have all of that going on, and then you're also supposed to be aiming for a 3.5 or higher in a very competitive school, because Duke is a top 10 school. So everybody around you is extremely smart. And I think you're going through this learning curve because you're now realizing, okay, I may have been the smartest person at my school before, but now I'm in a group of just as equally smart people. So I have to try harder than I used to. I have to learn to study in different ways I used to. And also I believe that, like, when you're studying law, it's almost like studying a new language. You're learning to read in a different way than you've ever read before. So you have all of this going on, as well as you're in a new environment, you're in a new place. How do you even make friends? Most of the people in the classroom don't look like you. A lot of people don't have the same background as you. But then you have BOLSO, right? You have BOLSO where you're able to enter a room and you feel understood as soon as you walked in. A lot of people who are older than you, because it's not just first years, it's second years and third years. So now you have automatic mentors. You have people who know exactly what you've been through, and maybe it wasn't the same time period, but I think every year something has happened, I think, for Black law students where, you know, it was something that was almost a distraction from what they should have been focusing on. And it's not something that I think white students have to deal with. They can choose to deal with it, but they have the privilege of not having to deal with it, and not having to be the voice of all Black people when you're one of three in your classroom.
Right.
Not having to, you know, shoulder this burden of having a conversation with a classmate that said something problematic in class. Do you let it go, or do you have a discussion about it? Because the reality is this person's going to graduate, possibly be a prosecutor, and having to, you know, be talking about putting a Black person in prison. So there's all of these responsibilities that are on you as a Black student that I don't think a lot of people realize. And so to have other Black students be able to understand that and discuss that with you, is powerful and necessary, because it can be very isolating if you're the only one person that has to do that.
Yeah. And so you talked about the Black law students. Can you talk about the faculty and staff and where they were in this journey?
Yes. So I can't speak for all law schools, but at Duke, we don't have that many Black faculty. I think I can count them on one hand, maybe on two hands. So, you know, maybe get an extra finger there. But I think that, for me, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, the Black faculty was very instrumental in my development as a lawyer. I think that I was able to make connections with professors, and they were able to have very candid conversations with me in ways that I couldn't have them with my white professors. I felt that some of the biases I may have experienced, or just situations I may have experienced with other students, I was not comfortable talking about that with a white professor. But, you know, there was Black faculty who I could share my experience, and I didn't feel that I was overblowing the situation, that they understood, because they had gone through what I went through, right? They're all lawyers.
Right.
So they've all been in law school, and presumably because they're older than me, there was less Black law students in their class than there were in mine. So I think they're able to kind of give me advice and say, look, this is how it is, and kind of help me get through it in ways that I think other white professors couldn't. And I'm not saying that that is never the case, because I do have some friends that, you know, really relied on their white professors and were able to find mentors through their white professors. I just think for me, that's not how it happened. And it's going to look different for everybody's experience. And, you know, I just see the value in having a professor that looks like you and has gone through an experience that's like you. And I don't think that's just for the Black community. I think that's for all communities, right? I think for any Asian communities, any Hispanic and Latino communities, it's very important to have somebody who looks like you, because our experiences are all very different and nuanced. So it's very important to be able to have somebody to have a conversation with like that.
Yeah. And so as the faculty, there are not that many Black faculty at the law school. There are also not that many Black staff at the law school, especially people that can provide that sense of community. And so can you talk a little bit about that and the areas that worked and did not work with the staff and the administration?
Yeah. I mean, I do have to also say that, there's a little famous saying that all skin folk are not kinfolk. I do think that's very true. So you can't really just look at someone just because they're Black and say, well, they're going to be my supporter. Because there have been times where I felt there was some Black, I wouldn't say professors, I would more say staff that should have been more supportive and should have been looking out for students more than they did. And I always felt like they dropped the ball. Like I even had a situation where they told me specifically that I was looking into a situation too much, that it wasn't racism when I knew in my heart that it was blatant racism that I was experiencing. And so I do have to preface it and say that. And I think that, you know, it shouldn't just be on the Black professors and the Black staff to create an environment where Black students feel comfortable. It shouldn't be on that, but that's the reality. Is it has been that, and it has been that. And so it's kind of disheartening when there is a Black faculty or Black staff that isn't supportive of Black students, because it is such a challenging time for us, just like in general. But then when you add the fact that we're Black, or even add the fact that we're a woman, on top of that, makes it even harder.
You know, one of the things that I remember about you, and I always tell people when I talk about you, is how smart you are. Probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. I mean, just simply brilliant, you know, and able to navigate things without it being too challenging for you. Because as you said, the first year of law school is really, really hard, but then you get past that and you become a voice and an advocate for Black, brown, all the affinity groups. You know, you're not just in your wheelhouse, but you're in theirs too, trying to help them navigate this thing. And one of the things I've learned over the years about these affinity groups is how they learn, right? So when you go to a class, you know, you come back and you talk about it with your group, and you're able to, you know, dissect whatever it is that you heard to a point where it makes sense, because maybe it was the way it was framed or posed to you that it didn't really sink in until you were able to kind of chat in your group. And I think we can all say a shout out to Brian Wright for always sitting in the Blue Lounge holding court in the Blue Lounge, making sure that everybody had what they need. And I think you were also a key component of that, making sure that 1Ls and 2Ls they're coming behind you had that support system. So I do think you should pat yourself on the back, because yes, all skin folk ain't kin folk. That's absolutely true. But there are some people who really stood up, and, you know, students, faculty, and staff who really showed up for you guys. And I think that that should always be acknowledged, you know, that, you know, there are ports in the storm, as the old people say. You know, there's places where you can go and you feel safe, you know, so I'm very grateful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have to say, like, you were one of those people for me in law school. Just, I remember, like, you would always have your door open for us on Sundays to come get, like, a warm cooked meal. And, like, it's just, like, that's not even where we're like, oh, we need to discuss this. It was just a place where we could come to feel safe and feel at home. And one of the things I always talk about is so much in the world, we're not given that opportunity to be as vulnerable as we want and as soft as we want. And I think you truly created a space where we were allowed to be soft and be at home and not have to carry the weight of the world on our backs. We could come and put it down for a while. And that's just so important. So I appreciate you so much for that as well.
Well, thank you very much for that. But I think, you know, to me, my attempt was what you said, like to make sure you had a home cooked meal, because you're away from home, right? And you're studying.
Mm-hmm.
So always a home cooked meal, but also to bring people to you that can become a part of your community. So, you know,
Right.
you can talk about Supreme Court Justice Sherry Beasley, you know, I mean, how she showed up, you know, Judge Becton, Judge Webster, you know, all of these judges who were able to come and talk to you all in the space of our home, and you all were able to make connections that you would not have ordinarily made if they weren't willing. And the judges were always willing to help. You know, they were always willing to come. If there was food, they were coming. If you were there, they were coming. There was incentive for them to come. And I hope that really was a good experience for all of you, and that that you find that community away from law school too. You find that sense of community and people who are willing to allow you to be yourself without judging you or without looking at you and trying to put any labels or things on you. Because I think specifically to be a Black woman in America, it is really, really hard. I've been reading this book that Malcolm X wrote, and from it there's some excerpts. But the one that I've said, and I've said this so many times this week, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but he said the most disrespected woman in America is a Black woman. The most neglected woman in America is a Black woman. And that was in 1962. And here we are in 2020, and that still holds true, that we are still fighting to find our way. And so in light of all of that, did you see the video of Mr. Floyd's death?
I actually do not watch videos anymore. I personally feel like I understood what happened and I've seen screen grabs, but for my personal mental health, I cannot watch the video of someone losing their life. So I think it might have been since Eric Garner. So that was a while ago. I don't think I've seen a video since then. I don't even think I finished his, but I do believe there's value in the videos. I just don't think I need to watch the video to understand that there's atrocities that are happening to these men and women.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as a Black lawyer, as a person that is a part of what we call law enforcement, regardless of whether you're a litigator or a prosecutor or whatever, that world is a part of your community, right? So that law enforcement officer belongs to the law community. So how do you envision that changing in such a way that our lives don't become so vulnerable, who we are or not that fear, and I'm sure your mother had this conversation with you. We every Black parent I know is having the same conversations. How to get their child to and from safely, right? So if you see the blue lights in the back of your window, if the police speaks to you or something like that, how do you envision us getting away from having to have those conversations, and that our lives are valued and we aren't dead under someone's knee with their hands in their pockets? That's such an ironic picture. I don't know if you saw that screen, but I mean, he's got his hand in his pocket with his knee on his neck. How do we undo that? How do we change that?
So I think I have a lot of thoughts on how we should change this, but first, I mean, we have to go back and look at the history of how police officers came about. They started as slave patrols.
Right.
And I personally don't believe that anything good can come out of something that was started with such evil intentions. Right. So I truly believe we almost have to dismantle it before we can see the way the police force should act. And two, I think right now we use police forces as a first line of defense against crime. When I actually give this analogy, this is like, when you see an illness, you usually get a vaccine first to try to prevent it from like you even catching it. Whereas like then afterwards, after you've caught it, you have to put all of this time and money into curing it, when it's so much easier to just attack it before it even starts. That's how I look at police forces. I see a police, like what they're doing is really, they're trying to attack the issue after it's become this like cancerous growth, when we need to be looking at what's causing people to, one, commit crimes. And I'm going to put quotes around crimes because we're criminalizing poverty. Right. What's causing people to commit these in the first place? And two, are we even looking for crime? Because a lot of these people who are getting arrested are usually walking down the street and they fit a description of some sort. Then they're caught with some sort of, weapon or drug that they shouldn't have had. And it's actually, these are the same things that white communities are doing, but they're actually looking for it in the Black community. So we're getting caught up in it. But I think one of the ways that we do have to attack that is saying, okay, so what's causing somebody to rob a grocery store? It's because they're hungry. So how can we put food on their table so they don't feel that they need to get to the point of desperation to steal in the first place? And I think that's like what we're not looking at, right? We're just looking at, well, they stole, so they go to jail, when we shouldn't even have gotten to that point in the first place. Why is somebody getting so hungry that they feel that they need to steal in the first place? I mean, I think we also have issues of the way our justice system is set up. We just focus on punishing people rather than rehabilitating people. A lot of people are suffering from trauma. A lot of people are suffering from hurt. Like, one of my favorite phrases is hurt people hurt
Or
people.
people.
So
Yeah.
there's all of these people who are hurt from the generations of trauma that they've experienced, and we're just locking them in a prison and throwing away the key, locking them in a literal cage,
Right.
when these are people.
Right.
We don't even treat animals like that. We have people boycotting zoos and boycotting SeaWorld, but why aren't we boycotting prisons?
Right.
I just don't believe we should be treating anybody with that kind of those kind of feelings, that kind of animosity, and we need to be approaching it with more kindness. And how can we help people? How can we show love to people rather than hate? So I think it's a multifaceted response to this, but I don't know if we need a police force in the way that we've seen it.
Yeah.
I think if we start doing things in the way that we're focusing on how can we help people, we don't need police officers in the way that we've traditionally seen them. And I don't know if we would even want to call them officers at that point.
Very, very good point. I think, when I grew up in an age where they were still basically slave patrols, except for we weren't no longer enslaved, but you could be arrested for the slightest thing, right? So even peaceful protests brought dogs and water hoses and all of these things like that. And so I think your point about the economics of law enforcement is really, really where we need to start focusing a lot of our attention. And I'll raise with you two things. So the crack epidemic really attacked the Black communities in so many ways. And it wasn't really just all Black, but that's what we saw on the television. That's how they spin the story. There was all Black people on crack, right? And so that was a very devastating thing to happen. So there were people trying to get drugs, people who were selling drugs and all these things. And then Clinton came out with the Three Strikes Act. And, so people who were doing very minor crimes were ending up in jail for the rest of their life. And now here we are now with the opioid epidemic and meth epidemic. We now understand this is a mental illness. You need help. Why wasn't it that when Black people were in that place? So is it because just it's white people that are predominantly using these drugs that it's a mental health issue? I don't know. And I'll go back to one other thing is so you are pretty young, so you were probably very little when they had Rodney King. You remember Rodney King?
Mm-hmm.
What happened to him?
I've heard of it, but I was very young. I think it happened the year I was born.
Yeah. So there were riots in Los Angeles after the beating, and the police were not charged. And there was a Black girl. So in a lot of poor Black communities, there are these little corner stores, right? And usually white or Asian or some people have these stores. And so this young girl goes into a store. She's got a book bag. She's got stuff in her hand, and she takes a bottle of orange juice and she puts it in her book bag. And so when she gets to the store, the lady, the Asian woman behind the counter, starts yelling at her, telling her, "You're stealing, you're stealing." And she said, I was going to pay you. I just had to, have a way to carry it. And so when she turned her back, the woman shot her. And, I look back, I can go way further back and look at this, so what I don't understand is where did it become so righteous and justified to kill a Black person for the simplest of things and imprison us, keep us economically repressed, and then tell us, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What bootstraps? Where are the boots? Where are we? I mean, what is the answer to that? How does law and economics intersect? And then if it does intersect, what are the things that need to be done to change it, right? Because we've had years of welfare and, all these other entitlement programs. Where does this intersection happen?
You raise a really good point. And I think one of the things that, I truly feel is there's nothing that anybody could do that I think deserves them losing their life. there's not anything that you could tell me that would make me justify taking someone's life. Even like officers, I don't believe like a police officer should at any point feel comfortable taking someone's life. That should be something that weighs over your head and weighs in the balance. Like, you shouldn't be abusing and hurting bodies because you think that they stole something, because at the end of the day you're now valuing property over life. And I think we've seen that multiple times, just like in this recent unrest. I'm in Atlanta, so there was the man who got killed at the Wendy's.
Yep.
And then they were more upset that Wendy's got burnt down than this man lost his life.
Right.
And it's just, why is there this value of property over life? And I think it also comes down to, that's kind of the way the system is set up.
Mm-hmm.
When you have capitalism, that's truly what allows us to believe that property is like all encompassing almost.
Yeah.
And then also to the point about the opium versus the crack epidemic, I think it simply comes down to, I think that white people can almost only see the humanity when it affects them more than when it affects other communities. So like the crack epidemic, yes, it affected a few white people, but it mostly affected Black people.
Right.
So instead of dealing with the issue and fixing it, let's just get them off the streets so we don't even have to look at it. Right? And now you're dealing with people who are just, like you said, it's a mental illness. It has nothing to do with these are bad people. This is a drug that's literally controlling them to the point where they're not able to properly feed their families and able to properly take care of them. And then you're looking at like the drug dealers, but these same people are just trying to put food on their families' tables, right? Like the way that the government shut out opportunities for Black people to create even like a sustainable life for themselves, right? We want to look at all the Black Wall Streets that have been destroyed,
Right.
all of the CIA operations that took out Black Panther leaders. It was literally in an effort to make sure that we could not thrive without being immersed into the general society. Even if we were trying to survive on our own, we could not.
Right.
And so I think for that simple fact, I can't even, like you even look at these drug dealers and you're like, they're so evil, they should be thrown in prison. But they're just trying to survive just like anybody else, but this is the only way that they can because they've been shut out of every single other opportunity.
Yeah.
And I don't think that many like white families that can understand like where their wealth comes from, where their history comes from, that in of itself is a privilege. I remember actually listened to this interview with Tiffany Haddish and Kevin Hart, and it's like, it's a privilege to understand where you come from. It's a privilege to understand like what your great great grandfather did, because you weren't ripped from a specific country and brought to a place without having like any idea of like being able to write down your history. Then like you're ripped to this new place, then you're continuously ripped from your family members. There's this whole history of, we don't understand like where we come from, where our wealth is. We don't know if we were kings or queens or if we were just farmers. We don't know any of that. We don't know which country in Africa we're from. We don't know which tribe we're from. There's all of this information that we don't know about ourselves that white people do know about themselves, and that in of itself is a privilege.
Right. That's absolutely.
And I think that stems to a lot of the issues that we're dealing with now, right? We're dealing with a lot of issues in terms of, there's just generational trauma, and I truly believe that gets passed down. And so, it's a hard question, because you don't even know, like, how do you fix this thing that's been broken for 400 years when we've only been really fighting it for like since the civil rights movement, like, right, that's when we started to really actively fight this. And so I think that we have come a long way, but we're definitely not far enough, and we have to be patient with it, because like I said, this is a 400-year issue. that we're trying to attack, and it's only been what, at most 60 years.
Yeah.
So
So the point you just raised about we don't know where we come from. One of the things when I talk to Latino or Hispanic people, I ask them about this thing at the border with this president, you know, and so having children separated from their parents, you know, is a traumatic thing for that child, and it might even be traumatic for that parent. But if you go back to slavery, this was done every day. As soon as your child was able to comprehend or to work, your child might be sold to another plantation owner, you know, anything. Your wife may be raped or whatever. You have all of these things that are there. And, you know, as I can empathize with the Hispanic and Latin community, they're just seeing what we've been seeing all of our lives, you know, what we've been seeing all of our lives. And one of the reasons why incarceration is so closely linked to slavery, because you take the father out of the house, and then what, right?
yeah.
So when the father's gone, the mother's got to work, especially if she's not well degreed and educated and all that stuff. She's got to work 2 or 3 jobs. Who's there to watch the kids, you know? Or you have grandmothers who are 16 years older than their daughter and their grandmother already, you know. So there's so many systemic things in our culture that needs to be addressed. And I think that people are interested in having conversations and all this stuff, but I really think we need policies and we need laws and we need things that are not able to be reverted, you know. So I mean, like the Voting Rights Act, you hear it come up every once in a while where they're talking about, you know, somebody might get rid of it. You know, you have all of these kinds of things that are constantly challenged, affirmative action, right? So that gave us a pair of boots. We didn't get the strap, we got the boot. All of a sudden they say, oh nope, you can't have that because you might be getting something we don't get, you know. So it's just really an unusual case to be a Black person in America. And it might be true for all other ethnicities too. It's just for Black people, it's just so, it's hard. It's just really hard.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna give you another cliche. This is my cliche. People tell me all lives matter. And I use this analogy. It's like you call the fire department because a house is on fire at the end of the street. And so when the fire department arrives, they start putting water on houses that are not on fire. They're just pouring water on, and the house that's on the end of the corner is burns all the way down. That's why Black lives matter, because they're the house that's on fire. It doesn't mean that other lives don't matter. This is the house that's on fire right now, so we need to put the water on this life.
Right.
And so for people to, you know, kind of justify when they say all lives matter or blue lives matter, who said they didn't? It's our lives that really don't matter, and we're trying to get you to see that our lives matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you bring up like an interesting point with the immigration. Like I actually had not even tied that to slavery, but you're absolutely correct. So actually, just like I never mentioned this before, but I actually grew up in Jamaica. So I actually think that the immigration issue is more closely tied to the Black community than we even realize. Obviously not to Black Americans specifically, but as a Black immigrant. And like there is a multitude of Black immigrants that are constantly coming into the US that are dealing with this, like not exactly the issues that you're dealing with at the border where you're having separation of kids and mothers, but a lot of the issues are still being dealt with different members of the Black diaspora. So I think it's, you know, it's like one of those things, like we always want to focus on like what's the issues in the Black communities, can we like focus on that? But it is, you know, I think that if we're able to see outside of ourselves and focus on all issues, it'll like help all members of all communities, because every single member of a community is going through something different. So even though like a Black American might not be going through an immigration issue, but a Black immigrant could be going through an immigration issue. And so if we're able to even focus on the immigration issues for the Hispanic and Latino members of our communities, that's also going to help you know, all the Black people, and not just this small subset of like what we kind of look at towards. I do have to also say that I think in terms of the Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter argument, I obviously agree with you on that. I think a lot of it is also, you know, it's making people uncomfortable. And I think for so long, uh and I could say this for myself, and even just like in my position at my law firm, like I do this a lot too. A lot of what you do on a day-to-day basis is making white people comfortable
Yes,
with your presence.
absolutely.
And I think like saying Black Lives Matter, why there's so much resistance is because now we're no longer silent and being comfortable, making ourselves smaller to make you comfortable. We're being louder and making ourselves known and present, and letting others know what we're truly going through. I think one thing that was different about this, um what's been going on now with the Black Lives Matter movement, with what's been happening before. For example, like when Eric Garner happened, I was actually living in New York at the time. So that happened in New York. I was working and living in New York, but I felt like I had to go into work. I felt I couldn't say anything about it. I had to keep a smile on my face. I had to work just as hard, be just as productive, even though I felt like something was kind of like dying inside of me, because there's like people who look like me are literally dying
Yeah.
on the streets. um and then now I feel like I'm less likely to be quiet about the what I'm feeling, right? We have protests going on. And like a lot of people at work would ask me, so how are you doing? And I think they were just expecting the I'm doing great, thanks for asking. And I've been very cognizant of not doing that anymore and saying I'm not doing okay, like what's going on is actually affecting me. I'm actually exhausted just from existing.
Right.
Because Ahmaud Arbery got killed from running outside and going on a jog. I run outside and go on a jog all the time. Does that mean like I now, and now I'm changing up how, like, what do my routes look like, what's, it has changed my life, but you're not affected at all. And I refuse to now stay silent about things that are truly affecting me in ways that I was silent before.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. And I would just say, you're fortunate because you're in a law firm and you're highly intelligent and productive and all that. And for me, at the university I work at, I'm highly productive. I do my work. I do all this. But if I raise my voice, it could cost me my job.
Mm-hmm.
Even doing these chats have been, a little iffy for me because my husband said to me the first time I started, he said, they may fire you, right? But a lot of the law faculty, white and black, have both said, nothing is going to happen to you, not while I'm here, and so I've been really fortunate in that. But I mean, you're absolutely right that you're supposed to be docile and quiet and be happy that you have a job. You're supposed to be happy that they're paying you. You're supposed to be happy, where all the time you're just crumbling on the inside. Your insides is literally falling apart because I'm having to swallow so much every single day. So microaggressions, name calling, all I'm having to swallow all that every day. So after a while, it's bubbling up, it's just bubbling up. And at some point, I'm going to tell you what's really going on with me. And I'm not going to be willing to accept that your white privilege gives you the right to talk or treat me any way that you want to treat me, or whatever your logic is for why you see me the way you see me. If I'm not doing my work, call me on it. If I'm not contributing to the team, call me on it. I have no problem with it. But if I'm doing my work, that doesn't give you the right to mistreat me or neglect me or put me in this corner that seems to satisfy you and not
Right.
do anything for me. So I think that this is going to be a long fight. I want to ask you one last question, and we have about 5 minutes. So I'll give you the rest of the time. I just want to ask you one other question. So, where are you with the November election? What are your thoughts about that? And where do you see that going?
Um, it's hard for me to say where I see that going. And I say that because in the 2016 election, there was so much talk about how it was like Hillary was a clear-cut winner, all of this data showing that she's gonna win, and that like nobody should be worried because nobody's really supporting Trump. And then it turns around and then he wins. I just feel like we're not gonna know what's gonna happen till it happens. And I'm only here to do my part to make sure that people vote, to make sure that people have the ability to vote. So I told myself, you know, like we have a lot of voter suppression issues in Georgia. You know, I'm planning on trying to find some way, how can I use my skills as a lawyer to make sure that others get their vote heard?
Right.
You know, get to place their vote. And I think that I'm just trying to do my little part that I can. You know, when I was at Duke, I took election law and I understand, you know, and I worked for Justice Sherry Beasley. A lot of a lot of her famous opinions have to deal with like gerrymandering and like people being able to vote and their vote actually being heard. You know, that was a lot of what I focused my writings on in election law as well. So this is that to me is very important. You know, my background comes from, my dad was very involved in elections in the country that I grew up in. So I just truly believe that this is our way of being able to get our voice heard. But then when there's systematic like barriers in place for you to even get your voice heard in the first place, you know, how do you even get over that hurdle? So I think like for me, I'm just trying to do my part in making sure that barrier is lowered for as many people as possible so they can just step over. But it's a process. I don't know what's going to happen in November at this point. I would hope that we are going to get somebody in the office that's actually going to, you know, improve our foreign relations, improve our race relations, at least get us back to what, you know, I personally want us to get past what we had before this current president. But, you know, at this point, I would just take the bare minimum. You know, we have the Supreme Court to think about. We have all of these federal judgeships, which are lifetime appointments, which really and truly affect so many people on a day-to-day basis. And to me, that's more important than getting every single one of the things that I need or I want for, you know, for what I want this country to look like. At the very least, I want it to be that we have a baseline for, you know, Black and brown and Asian. You know, I just want every single person to be able to feel that they're not being persecuted simply because of their color of their skin or where they come from.
I think that's absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for talking with me today. You said you have to go back to work, so don't work too hard today. But please stay in touch and let me know how you're doing and if there's anything I can do. And if you're coming to Durham, you know you cannot come through Durham without stopping by.
I absolutely would never do that. I would never even think of that.
Exactly. So Jabril was here about a month ago, and I was really sick when Jabril was here, so I didn't get a chance to see him. But he did come by, and you know, he saw the family, so that was really good. But absolutely, I must see you. And I ask you to subscribe to my channel. But have you looked at Bryant's or Jabril?
No, I haven't yet.
You need to look, and Marnicia's, you need to look at them, and I need to reach out and get in touch with Cam. I've lost his contact information, and Hennessy, I've lost his too, so I need to reach out to them because I want their stories to be told too. But subscribe to the channel and keep doing the work that you do. And you know, if you need me, you know, all you got to do is pick up the phone, and I'm right there. So.
All right, definitely. All right, it was great talking with you and catching up.
Absolutely, I love you. Stay safe.
Will do. I love you too.
Bye.
Bye.